So if you got fancy clothes but not a gun, be sure to sell the wife's mink stole and go get you a Glock.
I might be naked, but I got me my gun.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 255. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. And thank you and welcome to all of you who are new to the show and just checking us out. Hope you enjoy the show today, and I hope you will stick around, come back for more next week. Today is what we call our variety show with content from our awesome cast, Mia Anstein, Sergeant Bill Sylvia, and Pastor John Bennett. But we're doing something a little different today. Today is something we call Ask the Armed Lutherans, where we're going to answer a question, and it's kind of a general question, not terribly specific. Not a hard-hitting, political question or anything like that today. Something a little more lighthearted. And so each of us will be answering the same question from our own unique perspectives. But before we get to that, I want to thank the awesome men and women who make this show possible, the members of the Reformation Gun Club. Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded, and that means that we rely on the contributions of our members. We don't have any advertising. We don't have any sponsors. We rely on the generosity of the men and women who we call Reformation Gun Club members. They get some cool benefits in exchange for helping support the show. We'll talk a little about that in just a moment. Today, though, I want to give a special shout out to Vincent from Tulare, California, Robert from Monroe, Georgia, Steve from Grovetown, Georgia, Melvin from Holt, Missouri, and our two newest members, Tony from Little Elm, Texas, and Richard from Pagosa Springs, Colorado. Thank you all so much for your support, especially during these uncertain and crazy economic times. We really do appreciate your support. Like I said, folks, Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded. In exchange for your support, for as little as $1 a month, members get access to early access to the show each week. They get hours, or hundreds of hours, not just hours, hundreds of hours of exclusive content on our new website, invitations to our monthly online hangout, which I had to reschedule recently, and I apologize for that. We will be having that here in a couple of weeks. Those of you who are interested, would like to find out more about the Reformation Gun Club, I encourage you to check out our website, armedlutheran.us/gun club. Check out all the benefits for members. You get all those great benefits and the satisfaction of knowing that you helped keep this show going, and our eternal gratitude for doing it as well. So be sure to check that out, armedlutheran.us/gun club, or look for a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. Okay, as I mentioned, today is another variety show. It is something different, however. It's not just any variety show. This is what we are calling, and I mentioned this in the state of the podcast video, kind of pitched this idea early on. This is something we're going to call Ask the Armed Lutherans. And we're going to take whenever we do this, we're going to take one question, and each of us is going to answer that question from our own perspective. Today's question is about firsts. It's actually two questions, but they're two questions, and I decided to put them together into one. What was the first gun that you learned to shoot with, and what was the first gun that you bought for yourself, and why? So, okay, let me start off and give you an idea how this works. For me, as I've mentioned on the show, I think several times, and I think I've written about this in one of the Armed Lutheran books. The first gun I ever shot was a Marlin Model 60 .22 caliber rifle. It was a gift from my mom for Christmas. She gave one to my brother as well. So we had matching rifles. I think I was 11 or 12 at the time. My brother's almost 3 years younger, so he got the rifle earlier than I did. It's a semi-automatic rifle, which means for those of you who are unfamiliar with guns or not fully versed, semi-automatic simply means that once you chamber a round, it will continue to fire once for each pull of the trigger until the magazine is empty. And in this case, the magazine is just a big, long aluminum tube that runs underneath of the barrel. And you load it up kind of like, well, it's almost like if you've ever seen the old Daisy BB guns where you twist the end off the barrel and you pour all the BBs in, it's kind of like that, except the tube underneath the barrel, you twist there's a cap on the end of the magazine tube, and you twist that off and you pull out this plunger rod that has a little spring loaded follower inside of it. And that keeps all of the rounds compressed so that they'll keep feeding into the chamber, no matter how you point the gun. Anyway, you drop all the rounds in, slide them in, and then you put the tube back in, tilt and close it up. And to unload it, there really isn't any. It's not like taking the magazine out of an AR-15 or something, or a handgun where you just drop the magazine out. In this case, the only way to unload it is to cycle all the rounds out, or to take that plunger rod out and tilt the barrel, point it towards the ground, and just let all the all the bullets come sliding out. That, if I recall correctly, that magazine tube holds something like 18 rounds. So in modern parlance, it's high capacity. It's really freaking heavy by modern standards. If you compare it to something like a Ruger 1022, it's not even close. This thing is an absolute beast. I taught my kids to shoot with it, and they nearly toppled over trying to hold it. So we had to, I usually either had to find a way to rest it on a bench or to hold the fore end of it for them while they were shooting, because it's pretty hefty. It certainly was heftier than those plastic green M16 toys that we bought at the toy store when I was growing up, that made those clacking sounds when you pull the trigger. And that weight reminded us that this was the real thing. This wasn't just some toy. I think it has, I haven't shot it in a while, so I'm doing this from memory. It has a little small front sight, and a really small, thin V-notch rear sight, back towards it's mounted on the barrel, I think just forward of the receiver. And there's a little tiny, I would almost not call it a rail. I guess it is, that you can clamp a scope to, on top of the receiver. And our rifles, as I recall, came with these little cheap scopes that just had a simple crosshair. I have no idea what the brand was, but it doesn't really matter because the scope mount is not exactly rugged. This was not a Picatinny rail by any means. It was just a little groove on the top that you could clamp something to. And so that scope mount was prone to just pop right off. So after a while, we just tossed them and used the iron sights, which is better actually, because we learned to shoot properly that way. As a child of divorce, we didn't have a dad around to teach us how to shoot or to go hunting with us. So that was left to Mom and my late Uncle Bill. Mom bought the guns, and Uncle Bill taught us how to shoot. And he impressed on us very early the importance of gun safety. And back in those days, we still had hunter education in school, hunter safety. So the lessons that we learned on the farm with my uncle there in Western North Carolina were reinforced in junior high in those hunter safety classes. Never point the gun at something you're not intending to kill or destroy. I'd never heard it put in those terms. I never expected to hear it put in those terms. And when my uncle told me that, it really, the idea of kill or destroy, because, growing up, we played with guns, right? Like those plastic M16 things that we played with, that we bought in piles from the toy store. This was something different. This was a real gun, and it had real consequences, and the weight of those consequences hit home when my uncle said, kill or destroy. This was not just something that you play with. There were real consequences for pointing this thing and pulling the trigger. So never put your finger on the trigger until your sights are on target and you're ready to fire. Don't keep the gun loaded unless you're ready to use it. Treat all guns as if they're loaded. Be aware of your target and what's beyond it. One I remember from hunter safety was, never cross a fence while carrying a rifle. That they show. I vividly remember the diagram, the image that they showed on the screen of, you set the rifle down, you cross under the fence, or over the fence, depending on what kind of fence you're talking about here, and then you pick the rifle back up and keep on moving. You don't prop it against the fence because it may fall over. You don't try to carry it over the fence with you because you might trip. And that actually turned out to be kind of important, because where we wandered around behind on my grandmother's farm where I grew up, there were lots of old fence lines and things out in the woods. So that lesson, put the gun down, crawl under the fence, pick the gun back up, keep moving. I even did that when we were out in the woods by ourselves with toy guns. So those lessons carried over. I was never a hunter. I've never been a hunter, unless you count the one time that I went squirrel hunting with a friend and his grandfather, and we never saw a squirrel. That's the only time I've ever been hunting. But like I said, we did traipse around in the woods behind on our farm. At the time, we had like 40 acres when I was growing up, and most of it was woods. And so, like I said, there were old fence lines, and there was all kinds of obstructions that needed to be crossed at times as you moved around through the woods. And those lessons were important. They stuck. Before you got to the woods, there was a big, huge cornfield, or what used to be a cornfield. The farm hadn't been worked in years, except for my uncle coming every spring and summer and working a little bitty patch behind the smokehouse. But there was a field that I would always set up targets. I would set up things to shoot at, and I would go to the far end of the field, and then where I had a backstop, I would set up some targets and I would shoot, and eventually that got boring, so it turned into those little green action figures, or the little green soldiers, and I'd have formations of green soldiers, and then I was sniping them from across the field, and when those got blown to bits and I got bored, I'm sad to say, Star Wars action figures got into the fight. So, fortunately, my favorites, Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and Leia and Darth Vader, they survived. A bunch of nameless stormtroopers and droids and things like that got blown to bits. But when I went off to college, that rifle stayed at home and collected dust in a closet. And it didn't reappear until I got married, and it promptly found a new home in a new closet in my first house. So it didn't come back out again until years later. One night, we had this crazy dude show up on our front porch, drunk and beating on the front door and looking for my wife. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I thought about that old rifle. And I thought about it just long enough to realize that I didn't have any ammo. So there I was waiting in the dark in the front hallway with a claw hammer while my wife called 911, and I hoped that that idiot didn't actually get through the front door. And he didn't, fortunately. And that brings me to the first gun that I purchased with my own money. And believe it or not, I didn't rush out after that experience to buy a gun. I grew up in the country, and life was quiet and peaceful, and it was very different. It was a different country. It was a different time. I mean, I remember sleeping with my windows open at night and listening to the crickets, and crime really wasn't a thing back then, where we lived. And when we got married and settled in that area, the idea of crime really hadn't sunk in. Things had changed, obviously. Things were different. But it still hadn't become real for us, I guess. The guy on the porch knew my wife because she worked at a mental health clinic and he was a patient. So it wasn't like this wasn't some random act. It wasn't, just some crazy home invasion kind of thing. This was just some guy who really honestly needed help. And not long after that, we moved away. We moved to a whole new town, and that incident was forgotten. And the rifle with no ammo came with us to that new home and found a new home in a new closet. And not sure how long after that it was that I was working nights and my wife was pregnant and she was at home at night alone. I was working second and third shifts. And we got word that 2-3 doors down from us, the neighbor's teenage son had been sent to prison. Turns out he got himself involved in drugs and in a drug deal, and apparently shot and killed somebody in broad daylight. And that was bad. That was bad, we thought. But thank goodness he was behind bars. So we didn't feel unsafe. We were concerned, but it was taken care of. But we became more concerned, when his family threw a huge party one night with really loud music and lots of cars and lots of yelling and loud music and fireworks. And it kept my wife up late at night while I was at work. And it was still going on when I came home. Because it turns out that the case against Junior had been dropped because key witnesses had disappeared or refused to testify. So Junior was a free man. So not good. So I'm working nights and my wife is at home alone and pregnant, and we've got a murderer 2 doors down. And the very next day, I go out to the courthouse. Now in North Carolina, you can't, unlike here in Texas, where as long as you're a legal resident and you're, don't have a criminal record, I can go and purchase a firearm and get, as long as I've got a driver's license, I can go and do the background check and get my gun and come home with it. Well, not in North Carolina. In North Carolina, even to this day, you have to go to the courthouse and beg permission from the local sheriff for what they call a pistol purchase permit. But anyway, you have to wait 5 days and then come back and get your permit, and then you can go and buy a gun. So I waited my 5 days and went and got my permits and then went to the gun shop. And I showed up at the local gun shop looking for a handgun, and I knew nothing about what I was looking for. I just knew I needed a handgun, and that was that. I found several that I liked, and several that were expensive, and several that were in my budget. But then I saw a couple that combined fit my budget. And being the idiot and the newbie that I was, I figured, hey, 2 guns are better than 1, right? If my budget will accommodate 2 guns, why not get 2 guns? So I came home with a Taurus, something or other, I don't even remember what it was, and a Ruger P95 DC. This is a big bulky 9mm. The DC stands for decocker, I think. And I got a couple of boxes of ammo. And then I went downstairs to try them out. Now, the pistols were cool, I thought, but what did I know? I thought they were cool because, hey, I now am a gun owner. But in reality, if you go back and look at the pictures of those guns, they make Glock look sexy by comparison. These were some fugly guns. Anyway, I rented a lane and tried to act like I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. I got myself some of those, eye protection and ear pro, and went out to the lane and loaded my magazines, put my target up, and ran it out there a ridiculous distance. I think I put it out there like 20 yards. I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying to look like I knew what I was doing, but I'm sure the guy at the desk realized I was an idiot. But so I loaded up the magazines and racked around in and, made sure I knew what to do, how the controls worked and all that stuff. I shot a bunch of holes in the target, satisfied that I knew how the gun worked and that I could hit the target I was aiming at, barely. I then boxed up my guns and took them home, where they promptly went to the top shelf of my bedroom closet and sat for years. I then went to work, secure in the knowledge that we've got a gun for home defense. That's all we need. Even though I had no training, I had fired less than 100 rounds through both of those guns, and that was the only handguns I'd ever fired in my life, and my wife had never fired them and didn't know how to use them. Yeah, I was the kind of guy that we make fun of, right? The new gun owner who thinks he knows what he's doing, but doesn't really know his ass from a hole in the ground. Fortunately, I didn't get myself killed or anyone else. And I went on and I read stuff and I watched videos and I read articles and books and I took classes and learned enough to know what kind of crap those guns were. And it's been a long road of learning and trial and error and education, training and discovery, and it never stops. If you at any point get to thinking that you know everything, then you need to check yourself and stop, because you don't. There's always more you can learn, and there are always ways to improve. And I look back on those first guns with kind of a nostalgia, a little bit of fondness. I still have the Marlin in my safe downstairs. Like I said, I've taught both of my kids how to shoot with it, and at some point I'll be passing it on to one of them. Those pistols are long gone. Traded for something better once I learned better. But if I had it to do again, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't make a different decision, because buying those pistols was part of how I got where I am now. I had to be the stupid derp guy to be the armed Lutheran. So that's my first gun stories. I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback, or go to our fan page on MeWe.com or at Facebook and share your stories with us. We'd love to hear them. And we will do another one of these Ask the Armed Lutheran shows in the future with a different question. But now it's time to hear from the rest of the cast and hear about their first guns. So sit back and enjoy the rest of the show, and I will talk to you next week.
Time now for Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstein.
Hey guys, it's Mia visiting with you again. Today I am going to be talking a little about myself. Lloyd asked that we start a little bit of segment with you to share a little, kind of get to know the contributors type of segment. And I'm not very good at writing about myself. I am a writer, but I am terrible at writing my own bios. And I don't often talk about myself unless somebody queries me or encourages me like Lloyd did. And so today, I'll start off by saying that it's a cold winter day in Southwest Colorado. I'm actually sitting in my office in front of my little fireplace, and it is snowing big, huge snowflakes out the window. That just gives you a little insight as to where I am at the moment. Anyways, on to today's topic. Lloyd wanted to know a little about our first guns or our first shooting experience. And for those of you who don't know, I actually grew up around guns. I started shooting guns around 5 years old. And this is because my brother was 5 years older than me, which means he was 10, and he was starting to go hunting with my dad. So in order to kind of squash my curiosity and anything like that, he taught both of us how to shoot and taught both of us gun safety. So that's something that I'm always encouraging people to do, is to at least teach the safety and then judge by how old your youngsters are, whether they're ready to learn to shoot or not. But you definitely have to at least start with the Eddie Eagle program so that they know that guns are not toys, those youngsters. The first time I shot, we shot a .22 revolver, and I apologize that I cannot remember the make. I don't even know that at 5 years old I cared about the make. And unfortunately, my dad and my brother are no longer with us, and my mom was never into shooting, so she surely would have no clue what make that gun was. I do know that it was a .22. My dad had a .22 revolver and he had a .30-06 rifle. The rifle was not among the first guns that I shot, but the handgun was. And on the same day that we shot the revolver, my brother had also received an air gun. It was a Crosman with a CO2 cartridge, and I got to shoot that as well. So my dad kind of used the air gun to transition us into the handgun. And to this day, I'm a little bit amazed by this because my dad had no formal instruction. He just had this insight of how to kind of teach us safety, yet transition us. And I can share a picture on social media of me. I had revolvers and a holster since I was a toddler. I love 6-shooters to this day. So that's just a little fun fact about my first shooting experiences and how I learned to shoot, and a little about how my dad found a means to teach us. Those are things that you can use in your endeavors and teaching others how to shoot. I have always just loved revolvers, and mainly because I grew up in a rural area. We just were around the Wild West where we lived, so it was definitely something that intrigued me, and I think it's nostalgic today. Lloyd also asked about the first gun that I bought for myself. And quite honestly, I have a collection. I always say I'm not a hoarder, but as an outdoor writer, I do get a lot of guns, and I'm trying to remember because I had my first guns before I became a writer, but my first gun of my very own was a .270 Winchester, and it was a hunting rifle. It is one that my family actually bought me for my birthday one year. They asked what I wanted, and what I wanted that year was to start hunting on my own. Prior to that, I also grew up going hunting, which is very similar to actually hunting, but I tagged along since I was a youngster, and I wanted to start doing my own hunting, and I told my dad I wanted a rifle. So he and my aunt and a friend went in together, and they bought me this rifle. It is the rifle that is still one of my favorites in my safe, and one that I love. The caliber is one that I always go back to. It's a go-to caliber for me, even though there are trends into magnum rounds and short mags and all these different things. I always head back to that tried and true Winchester .270 cartridge. And that's something that I have used to take elk, bear, deer, all sorts of big game animals with that cartridge. As far as that rifle. It is a hunting rifle. It has a bolt action. It's very basic. I've talked about other bolt action rifles here and on my personal websites. And I wouldn't say that it's at the top of the list as far as my most favorite firearms, as far as quality and the way they run, but it's one that it's taken a licking and kept on ticking. It's been a great starter gun for me when I first started hunting, and it's just bumped around throughout the years. Obviously, you need to take care of your firearms, but if you've ever hunted in the mountains of Colorado or any other area, you know that guns, no matter how hard you try to take care of them, they do take some bumps and scuffs and scrapes. So always remember your safety tips and keep your fingers off the trigger, muzzles in a safe direction, and all of those things when you're out hunting. I want to talk to you about the first revolver that I bought of my own, since revolvers are kind of a thing for me. And it's one that I carry for concealed carry now. I have a few different guns that I carry for concealed carry, but the Kimber K6S is one of my favorite handguns. It is the first revolver that I got of my own. And that handgun, it is small enough to conceal on my little body, and it also is a 357. So that gun packs a punch. I am currently writing an article about women and larger caliber guns, because a lot of times people think, oh, you're not going to be able to manage the recoil on that. And some women, such as myself, do like a larger caliber cartridge. And I was recently taking a course with one of my great friends, and that's the Olympian Lanny Barnes. And she took some time to give a course to myself and my husband, and that was our Christmas gift to each other, was to go to a lesson and get brushed up on some of our skills, see if we had relaxed in any areas, and if we needed to be taken back to basics and get our muscle memory back, so forth. But when I went, I took my 9mm, my Sig Sauer P365. It's one of my favorite handguns. And then I also took my Kimber Ultra Carry 2, and it's a 45 caliber. It's a full-size gun. I do carry that during hunting season, and I call it concealed. It goes under layers and nobody can see it. Since we were doing concealed carry drills, I started out with my 9mm. I do carry that quite a bit because I'm able to conceal that even in the summertime. And through the drills, I did good. We worked on things, and she told me some tips of stuff that I could do differently or better or be more efficient at. We went through some scenarios and so forth. And maybe I'll include that in a future segment. But when it came to the 45, we did the same basic skills scenarios, and she really looked at me and she said, wow, you're so much more confident and accurate and quick with that 45. Those larger calibers can definitely be a thing for you if you are comfortable with it. I wish I had taken the Kimber K6S, because that little gun, the trigger on it, it has a roller trigger, and I really like that little gun. If you ever have the chance to shoot one, I suggest that you take the opportunity. And so that's a little bit about my first guns. Oh my gosh, I say that I don't talk about myself, but I guess I'm truly not talking about myself, but more about guns, right? I hope that you found this interesting and intriguing, and maybe you learned something from it as well. I always try to teach a little in my segments. I look forward to learning maybe a little about you and your first guns. I hope that you could post about that in the Reformation Gun Club or on the Armed Lutheran sites. Have a great one. I look forward to chatting with you again. Bye, guys.
You can read more from Mia, watch her YouTube videos, or check out her podcast, Mac Outdoors with Mia and Leah, at miaanstein.com. Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today I'm going to talk to you about my first guns. So, the first guns I learned to shoot with, well, it was probably the fall of 1990. I was in college at Texas Tech out in Lubbock, Texas, and a roommate that I had, on a Saturday morning, we were bored and trying to find something to do that wouldn't cost us a bunch of money, and I think he found a coupon in the back of the phone book that we had in our dorm room, and the coupon was for Patriot Firearms indoor range in Lubbock. And it was, I don't remember exactly what it was. It was something like rent a lane and rent 2 guns and ammo included, and it wasn't too expensive, so we decided to go check it out. Now, my roommate at the time said he had shot some handguns before, but I don't think he had, because he didn't really know what he was doing. So we actually got lucky. The range was pretty empty, and the guy running the range that day was a retired Army Ranger. So we asked him what guns, he would recommend we try out, and he recommended 2, a Colt 1911 full-size government in .45 ACP, and a Colt Cobra 38 Special Snubby, little 2-inch snub-nose revolver. So this guy took a few minutes and gave us the the rundown on how to grip the gun, each one of them, how to load them, how to be safe with them, how to shoot them, everything in just a quick, easy, really nice way, and I actually learned a lot from him. So we shot probably 50 to 100 rounds through each gun, and it was really interesting. I know it really piqued my interest, and I really wanted to go shoot some more. I do remember that little 38 Snubby had little tiny grips on it, and I didn't really enjoy shooting it very much, and that long double action trigger. So, shocker, I don't shoot revolvers that much. Now, the first gun I bought was a couple years later when I turned 21. I bought a pistol. I bought a Star Firestar 40 Smith & Wesson. Now, Star is, I think it's a Brazilian company. The Firestar was kind of a copy on a compact 1911. So it was a single stack gun. It was a single action only trigger where you had to load around in the chamber and cocked and locked, ambi safety. It was a tiny little gun. I figured it was a nice little concealment gun. And all the cops in that day and age were all carrying 40 Smith & Wesson. So, hey, why wouldn't I, right? Being 40, it was pretty snappy to shoot. I mean, it was an all-steel gun, but it was pretty small. And I never really carried it because I never really learned how to carry single action, like a 1911, as far as carrying it on you. The only way I knew how to carry it would be to have an empty chamber and a full magazine and the hammer down on an empty chamber. But that was right after Texas adopted their first concealed handgun license bill, and it went into law. So I pretty much, because I had helped kind of get petition signed for it with some friends of mine, I wanted to get a carry gun, so that's the gun that I got. I didn't keep that pistol for very long because it wasn't very reliable, and it wasn't very fun to shoot, and it wasn't very good to carry for me. So shortly after that, I bought my first shotgun. I bought a Mossberg 500 pump, which I still have to this day. It's been through several different iterations with pistol grip and pistol grip with a buttstock and collapsible buttstock and a bunch of different stuff I've tried out on it, and it's just a good, solid pump shotgun. A year or two after that, I was probably in my early 20s, probably 23, 24. A buddy of mine I was working with at a restaurant, we were going to go hunting. His dad was going to take us mule deer hunting, and I needed a rifle, so I bought my first rifle. I bought a Remington 700. It was a 7mm Magnum. That thing was a beast. It was a composite stock with a silver barrel in action. Had a big scope on it, and I think I took it to the range and zeroed it in and probably put 10 rounds total through that gun and never shot it again, and ended up selling it probably 5 or 6 years later when I went in the military. Well, those were my first guns. A little interesting factoid about my history. So my maternal grandfather died when I was very little. He actually was an avid hunter, and he would reload his own bullets, cast his own bullets, and used to eat everything that he hunted. And my mom has lots of memories about stuff like that. But the funny thing was, he was very strict on his girls that they were not to touch the guns, because back in that day, you didn't take your girls out to the range or hunting. So there were never any guns in my house, and my dad never had any guns. He shot couple guns in the military and did okay with them, but was never really enthusiastic about shooting. So, kind of strange that the history rolled around and here I am carrying a gun for a living, reloading my own ammo, and shooting as much as I can. Well, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Force and a masterclass competitive shooter. You can check out his YouTube videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill. It's time for Pastoral Pontifications with Pastor John Bennett.
Hello, this is the pistol packing Padre, Pastor John Bennett, and today I get to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, guns. So what was my first gun? Well, before I get to that, I have to talk about learning to shoot. Now, I grew up in a heavily populated area, and I really didn't shoot a real gun until I was 22 years old. So I learned to shoot with BB guns. My best friend had a BB rifle and a CO2 BB pistol that I would shoot frequently with him in his backyard. Of course, much of it was self-taught because, while I grew up in California, it was before the era of the helicopter parents, and we did this without any adult supervision. So we more or less taught ourselves how to use the sights, how to shoot accurately, and so forth. Now, fast forward to college graduation, and my sister had given me a Crosman BB pistol. It was just a single shot. You had to manually cock it each time you shot the pistol, and I'm sure I still have it somewhere sitting in a box in the basement. It was styled after the 1911. Now, it wasn't anything fancy, but it came with darts. And I spent a lot of time my first year at seminary practicing in my dorm room shooting into a dartboard. But even before I was given that BB pistol, I always had an affinity for the 1911. Now, I can't really explain it. I'm sure there was a reason early on in my life. Perhaps it was some old war movie that I watched with my dad, and I just liked the way that the 1911 looked. Or maybe it was that cheap battery-operated water pistol I had as a teenager that was also modeled after the 1911, and I just liked the way it felt in my hand. So you can imagine that when it came time to buy my first gun, naturally, I looked for a 1911. I bought my first gun in 2002 while I was a student at the seminary during my second year of seminary. And it was a Springfield Armory mil-spec government-sized 1911, very similar to a standard World War II GI configuration. I picked up that pistol for a whopping $500. How many of us wish that we could go and buy guns at 2002 prices today? Now, that pistol, it shot great. It never had a single malfunction for the brief time that I owned it. But it was a very brief time indeed. After a month or two, I realized after concealed carrying that pistol every single day that it was really bulky, it weighed way darn too much, and it was generally very uncomfortable for everyday carry. Now, perhaps I didn't have an appropriate, well, I take that back. I can tell you for sure that I didn't have an appropriate holster for it. I had one of those cheap, flimsy Uncle Mike's inside the waistband universal fit holster. And even then, the pistol didn't quite fit right in it to begin with. So I decided that it was time to look for something else. And of course, being a poor seminary student, not having the finances to just go out and buy a new gun, I needed to trade. But I didn't learn my lesson. Instead of looking for something that was better suited for concealed carry, something that wasn't overly bulky, that was slim and compact and easy to carry without being uncomfortable, I decided to look for another 1911. And I ended up owning this pistol for much longer. It was a Colt XSE series, it had all the bells and whistles. It had ambidextrous safety, extended beaver tail, had front and rear slide serrations, stainless finish. It was a beautiful pistol. And it was a lightweight Commander version, so it weighed about half a pound less than that clunky, full-sized 5-inch government barrel in that previous pistol. But that stinking Colt never worked right. Now, when it worked great, it was wonderful. It shot well, it was accurate, but it didn't seem like I could get through a full magazine ever without there being a malfunction at the last few rounds of the magazine. Now, I put up with that pistol for a couple of years. I carried it every day. I carried it inside the waistband holster. It was a little more comfortable to carry because it wasn't quite as heavy. But because it was still bulky, it was more pistol than is practical for carrying concealed. I just got to the point where I really didn't carry anymore. And so it sat in the safe for Lord knows how much time until I finally decided, if I'm going to get something to conceal carry, get something that's practical, that fits me. And so I bought my first Plastic Fantastic polymer pistol. What I learned in all of this is that you have to separate your expectations from reality. Now, yes, I still love 1911s. I currently don't own any, but I've been looking for one. And of course, I picked the wrong time to look for one because right now it's hard to find any decent firearms at any decent price. I should have started looking before all of this insanity happened with COVID, with the riots and all of that. But one thing that I will share with all of you is that when it comes to purchasing firearms, hold on to what you get. Now, if you have something that you just don't like, it doesn't function the way that you'd expect it to, it's just something you don't care to hold on to, yeah, sure. Go ahead and sell it. Go ahead and find something else that suits your needs better. But hold on to what you have. Those same pistols that I got for, well, by today's standards, half of what they would cost. They really have appreciated with value. So hold on to what you have, shoot what you have, and also, when it comes to concealed carry, learn from my mistakes. Make sure you find something that is practical, that fits your needs, that's comfortable, so that you don't end up with something that's too big for concealed carry, something that makes it so that you don't even want to carry. Well, that's my experience for learning to shoot for my first guns. When the link for this episode is posted on social media, tell me what your first gun was. Tell me about your experience. I'd love to read about it. That's all that we have for this time. May God richly bless you now and always. Bye-bye.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.